Snow fell soft against the tall windows of Wexcombe Hall, and inside, on the cold floor of her own bedchamber, a young woman lay too weak to lift her head. Her name was Charlotte, and only 3 months ago she had been a bride. Now she could not remember the last time her husband had spoken her name with kindness, or spoken it at all. She reached for the bell to call for help. Her fingers trembled, and at that very moment the door opened. The Duke of Wexcombe stepped into the room. He looked down at his wife on the floor, the way a man might look at a stain on his boot. He did not kneel. He did not call for a doctor. He simply stepped over her, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out to dine with the woman he truly wanted. The door closed behind him. And then, far below, in the frozen dark of the courtyard, came the sound of carriage wheels on stone, and a knock at the gate that no one in that house had expected. The trouble with Charlotte, everyone at Wexcombe Hall agreed, was that she was weak. That was the word they used, weak. The Duke said it. His mother had said it before she passed, and Lady Regency, the beautiful widow who now seemed to drift through the great house as though she already owned it, said it most often of all, always with a soft, pitying smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Poor thing," Lady Regency would murmur to the servants. "Some girls simply are not built for the duties of a great house. It is no one's fault, of course, but one does wonder what the old Duke was thinking, choosing her." And the servants, who did not dare disagree with a woman who had the Duke's ear, and it was whispered, a good deal more than that, would nod and lower their eyes and carry the whisper down to the kitchens. But Mrs. Fenwick did not whisper. Mrs. Fenwick, who had kept the keys of Wexcombe Hall for 30 years, who had buried 2 masters and served 3, watched the young Duchess grow paler and thinner by the week, and she did not believe for one moment that it was weakness. She had seen weakness. Weakness did not come on all at once, in a healthy girl of 21 who had ridden and danced and laughed only a season ago. Weakness did not arrive the very month a certain widow came to stay. But Mrs. Fenwick held her tongue, because a housekeeper who spoke out of turn was a housekeeper without a place, and if she lost her place, there would be no one left in all that cold house to bring the young Duchess her broth, or sit by her bed in the long afternoons, or hold her hand when the shivering came. So she watched, and she waited, and she prayed to God that someone, anyone, would come. Charlotte had not always been so alone. She remembered on her better days the house she had grown up in. Not grand, not titled, her father had been a gentleman of modest fortune and enormous heart, a man who read poetry aloud after supper and knew the name of every tenant on his small estate. She remembered her mother's garden. She remembered laughter. And she remembered the day her father died, and the strange, quiet visit that had come after. She had been 19, grief-stricken, alone in the world, for she had no brothers, no sisters, no living kin she knew of. And into that grief had come a letter, and then a carriage, and then the announcement that quite took her breath away. She was to be married. To a duke. To the young Duke of Wexcombe, no less, one of the great names of the county. It had been arranged, she was told, by the old Duke himself, Julian's father, before his own death. A debt of honor, the letter said. A promise made long ago between 2 men, that the daughter of one should never want for a home or a name, and that the son of the other should see it done. Charlotte had not understood it then. She did not fully understand it now. What debt could a great duke owe to her gentle, unremarkable father? What promise could bind 2 men from such different worlds? But she had been young and frightened and terribly alone, and a duke's protection had seemed like a door opening in a dark room. So she had said yes. She wished now that she had asked more questions. Because Julian, the young Duke of Wexcombe, had not wanted a wife. He had made that plain from the very first. He had stood at the altar with a face like carved stone, and he had spoken his vows the way a man reads a bill he has no intention of paying. And when it was done, when the ring was on her finger and the carriage carried them back to this vast, echoing house, he had turned to her and said the only honest words he would ever give her. "Understand this," he had said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "I did not choose you. My father chose you from beyond the grave to satisfy some sentiment I have never understood. I will not be cruel to you, but do not expect love or warmth or anything at all beyond the shelter of my name. That is all I have to give, and it is more than you are owed." She had been too stunned to weep. That came later. He had kept half his word, at least in those first weeks. He was not cruel. He was simply absent, a cold and distant figure who dined at the far end of a table so long she could scarcely see his face, who rode out before she woke and returned after she slept, who passed her in the corridors of their own home like a stranger passing on the street. She had told herself she could bear it. Loneliness was not the worst fate. She had a roof and a name, and time, perhaps in time, something might soften. Then Lady Regency came. She arrived in October in a carriage even finer than the Duke's, dressed in half-mourning silks that suited her far too well to be truly sad. She was a widow, she explained, of great fortune and greater feeling, an old and dear friend of the Wexcombe family. She had come to stay only a little while, to help, to bring some life back into a house that had grown so very grim. And from the moment she crossed the threshold, everything changed. Julian, who had never once looked at Charlotte with warmth, looked at Lady Regency with something Charlotte had never seen in him at all. He laughed at her jokes. He lingered at her side. He came to dinner early for her and stayed late, and the sound of their voices and their laughter drifted up through the floors of the great house to the room where his wife sat alone. Charlotte was not a fool. She saw what it was, and though it broke something inside her, she told herself again that she could bear it. Many wives bore worse. She would keep her dignity. She would not weep or beg or make a scene. But then the sickness came. It began small, a weariness she could not shake, a trembling in her hands, then the headaches, blinding and sudden, then the nights when her stomach turned to fire and she lay curled on the cold floor because she could not reach the bed, then the days when she could not rise at all. The Duke sent for a physician once in the beginning, a fashionable London man, a friend of Lady Regency's as it happened. He examined Charlotte for all of 10 minutes, murmured something about a delicate constitution and nervous exhaustion, prescribed rest and a tonic, and left. The tonic did nothing. She grew worse. And Lady Regency, Lady Regency was so very concerned. "You must not tire yourself, dear Charlotte," she would say, arranging the pillows with her own soft white hands, her rings cold against the sick woman's skin. "You must let me look after things while you rest. The household, the accounts, the Duke. You must not worry about a single thing. Just rest and take your medicine and let me carry your burdens for you." And she would smile, that soft, pitying smile, and set the small glass of tonic on the table by the bed, and watch, with those eyes that never quite warmed until Charlotte drank it down. On the night the snow came, Charlotte had not eaten in 2 days. She had rung the bell for Mrs. Fenwick, but the poor woman had been sent to the far village on some errand invented by Lady Regency that very afternoon, and would not return until morning. The other servants had learned, by now, not to answer the Duchess's bell too quickly. The widow did not like it, and the widow's displeasure was a dangerous thing. So Charlotte lay alone, and the fever climbed, and somewhere in the long cold hours she found the strength to crawl from her bed toward the door, thinking only that if she could reach the corridor, someone might find her, someone might help. She did not reach the door. She lay upon the floor, her cheek against the cold boards, and she heard from somewhere below the sound of music and laughter and 2 glasses touching. And she thought, with the strange clear calm of the very ill, that she was perhaps going to die in this house, on this floor, and that not one soul beneath its roof would truly mourn her. It was then that the door opened. For one wild, foolish moment, her heart leapt, because surely, if he saw her like this, even he would feel something. Even a cold man could not look upon his wife dying on the floor and turn away. Julian, Duke of Wexcombe, stood in the doorway in his fine dark evening coat, a glass of wine still in his hand. He looked down at her. His face did not change. "Get up," he said. "You will catch a chill lying there. It is embarrassing." She tried to speak. She could not. "The whole house is talking, you know," he went on, and there was irritation in his voice now, the peevish irritation of a man interrupted at his pleasure. "The great tragic Duchess, wasting away. Lady Vesey says you do it for attention. I am beginning to think she is right." He set his glass down on the mantel. For one moment, one single moment, Charlotte thought he might come to her, might kneel, might, God help her, simply touch her hand. He straightened his cuffs. He adjusted the fall of his coat. And then he stepped over her, over his own wife, over the woman who bore his name, lying wasted and shivering on the floor of the house he had brought her to, and he walked out, and he closed the door behind him, and he went down to the warm, bright dining room where another woman waited for him with a smile and a glass of wine. Charlotte lay in the dark and the cold, and she closed her eyes, and she let go of the last small hope she had been holding. And that was the moment, the very moment, that the sound came up from the courtyard below. The crunch of carriage wheels on fresh snow, the stamp and snort of tired horses, a voice, sharp and clear and utterly unafraid, ringing out across the frozen dark, demanding to be let in. And then, echoing through the great cold house like a hammer blow, a knock at the gate. Down in the dining room, the laughter stopped. Lady Vesey set down her glass. The Duke frowned toward the window. Servants glanced at one another in the sudden silence, for no visitor had been announced, no guest was expected, and it was very late, and the snow was very deep. Who would come to Wexcombe Hall on such a night, at such an hour? The knock came again, louder now, and slower, the unmistakable knock of someone who has never in their life been made to wait on a doorstep, and does not intend to begin now. And upstairs, alone on the cold floor, Charlotte heard it too. She did not know what it meant. She could not have known that everything was about to change. But she felt, for the first time in a very long time, something stir in her chest that she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt hope. The knocking did not stop. In the dining room, the Duke of Wexcombe rose slowly from his chair, wine forgotten, and there was on his face an expression Lady Vesey had never seen there before, uncertainty. "Are we expecting anyone?" she asked lightly, though her eyes had gone sharp. "No," he said. A servant came hurrying in, pale and flustered, twisting his hands. "Your Grace, forgive me, there is a carriage at the gate, a lady. She will not give her name to me, Your Grace. She says she will give it only to you. She says," the young man swallowed, "she says you will regret it, Your Grace, if you keep her standing in the snow one moment longer." Lady Vesey laughed, a bright, brittle sound. "The impudence! Send her away, Julian. Whoever she is, she can call at a decent hour like a Christian." But the Duke did not send her away. Something in the servant's fear, in the sheer confidence of that knocking, had reached the part of him that had been raised to no rank when he heard it. A woman who spoke like that, who threatened a duke on his own doorstep and expected to be obeyed, such a woman was not turned away lightly. "Open the gate," he said. "Julian," Lady Vesey began. "Open it," he said again, and there was iron in it, and the servant fled to obey. They heard the great gate groan open. They heard the carriage roll into the courtyard, the door thrown wide, the brisk tread of feet upon stone and then upon the marble of the hall. And then the doors of the dining room swept open without so much as a knock, and the woman came in. She was old, perhaps 70, but there was nothing frail in her. She stood tall and straight in traveling furs worth more than most men earned in a lifetime, a black cane in one gloved hand that she plainly did not need for walking, and she surveyed the room and everyone in it with the cool, unhurried gaze of a woman who has never once in her life wondered whether she belonged somewhere. Her eyes passed over Lady Regency and dismissed her. They settled on the Duke. "You," she said, "are Julian, the old Duke's boy. Yes, you have his jaw and none of his sense, I see." The Duke drew himself up. "Madam, I do not know who you are, or by what right you force your way into my house at this hour." "Your house?" The old woman's mouth curved, but it was not a smile. "We shall come to whose house this is in time. My name, boy, is Augusta, the Dowager Duchess of Cranley." She let the name fall into the room and watched it land. "Perhaps you have heard it. I understand you have been most eager this past year to make my acquaintance." The Duke's face changed. Lady Regency did not know the name, but the Duke knew it, and the widow, watching him, saw him go pale, and understood at once that whoever this old woman was, she mattered. She mattered a very great deal. For the Duke of Wexcombe had indeed heard the name of the Dowager Duchess of Cranley. He had heard it in every drawing-room and gentlemen's club he had entered for the past 12 months. The Dowager of Cranley was one of the great powers of the age, not through any title her husband had left her, though that was grand enough, but through the sheer force of who she was. She held the ear of half the great families of England. A word from her could open every door in London, or close them all. Fortunes and reputations moved at her pleasure. Men far greater than Julian had spent years courting her favor and counted themselves blessed to receive a nod. And Julian needed her favor more than most. For the truth of Wexcombe Hall, the truth that lay beneath its cold marble and its fine dark coats, was that the old Duke had died, leaving the estate drowning in debt. The lands were mortgaged. The coffers were near empty. The great name of Wexcombe was a magnificent ship with a hole in its hull, and Julian had spent the whole of his young dukedom bailing frantically and praying no one would notice. He had thought, he had hoped, that a word from the Dowager of Cranley might save him. Her blessing could bring him the credit, the connections, the advantageous alliances that might yet keep the whole thing afloat. He had written to her, twice. He had received no reply. And now here she stood in his dining room in the dead of night, in the snow, and she was looking at him as though he were something she had scraped from her shoe. "I have come," said the Dowager, "to see my goddaughter. Take me to her." The Duke blinked. "Your goddaughter? Are you deaf as well as foolish? My goddaughter, the girl I have not been able to find these 3 months, though I have turned half of England upside down looking. The girl whose father was the dearest friend I had in this world, and to whom I made a promise on his deathbed that I would see her safe." The old woman's voice, which had been cold, grew colder still. "Imagine my surprise, boy, when I at last traced her and found her married. To you. And imagine my surprise this very evening, when I arrived at your gate and was made to stand in the snow, while up above I could see but one window lit in all this great dark house, and behind it no candle moving, no servant, nothing, as though whoever lay in that room had no one to tend them at all. The silence in the dining room was absolute. "Her name," said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley very quietly, "is Charlotte. Now, you will take me to her, and God help you, Julian of Wexcombe, if she is not well." Lady Regency found her voice at last. "Your Grace," she said, gliding forward with her sweetest smile, "what a very great honor. I am afraid there has been some distress in this house. The poor Duchess has been so terribly unwell, a delicate constitution, you understand, the nerves, we have done everything, but she will not mend." The Dowager turned and looked at her, once from head to foot. "And who," she said, "are you?" The smile flickered. "I am a friend of the family, your Grace, Lady Regency. I have been nursing the dear Duchess myself night and day." "I did not ask what you have been doing. I asked who you are. "And I find," said the dowager, turning away from her as though she had ceased to exist, "that I do not much care. Julian, my goddaughter, now." And Julian, Duke of Wexcombe, who had never in his life been afraid of anything, who had stepped over his own wife's body an hour before without a second thought, found that his mouth had gone dry and that he was, for the first time, deeply and truly afraid. Because he was thinking of that window, the one lit room, and of the woman he had left on the floor behind its door. He turned without a word and led the way up the great stair, and the dowager followed, her cane striking each step like a slow drum, and Lady Regency came behind them with her skirts gathered in her white-knuckled hands and her mind already racing, trying to see a way out. Upstairs, Charlotte had heard none of the words, but she had heard the voices, a woman's voice, strong and clear and unafraid, cutting through the house like a blade, and something in it had been familiar, though she could not think why, and she had dragged herself inch by inch, until her back was against the side of the bed and she was almost sitting, her whole body shaking with the effort. The door opened. She saw Julian first, his face white, and she flinched, thinking he had come back to shout at her again. And then behind him, she saw the old woman push past him into the room, saw her stop dead at the sight of the girl on the floor, the wasted face, the thin arms, the untouched bed, and the small glass of tonic on the table. And she saw the old woman's face, that proud cold face, crumple all at once into something like grief. "Oh," breathed the Dowager Duchess of Cranley, "oh, my dear child, my dear, dear child, what have they done to you?" And she crossed the room, this great and terrible woman before whom dukes trembled, and she went down onto her knees on the cold, hard floor without a thought for her furs or her dignity, and she gathered the dying girl into her arms. Charlotte stared up at her. Something stirred far back in her memory, a garden, a summer long ago, a grand lady who had come to visit her father and had let a small girl try on her rings and had laughed, a real warm laugh, and said, "This one has her mother's eyes." "I know you," Charlotte whispered. It was the first full sentence she had managed in days. I know you." "Yes," said the old woman, and her voice broke on it. "Yes, you do. I am your godmother, child. I promised your father I would keep you safe. I am late. God forgive me, I am so very late, but I am here now." Her arms tightened, fierce and protective. "I am here now, and I am not going anywhere, and no one in this house will touch you again." She lifted her head, and when she looked up at the Duke and the widow standing frozen in the doorway, the grief was gone from her face, and in its place was something that made even Lady Regency take a step back. "Send for a physician," said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley. "A real one, tonight. From the city, if you must, I will pay, and I will choose the man myself, and none of you," her cold eyes moved from Julian to Regency and back, "none of you will go near this child again until he comes." "Your Grace," Lady Regency tried, "surely there is no need for such." "You," the old woman's voice cracked like a whip, "you will hold your tongue, and you will get out of my sight, or I promise you, madam, whoever you are and whatever you are playing at, I will make it the last mistake you ever make in polite society. Do I make myself understood?" Lady Regency went white. She said nothing more. And Julian, looking down at the old woman cradling his wife, whom he had stepped over, whose name he had scarcely spoken in 3 months, felt the cold marble floor of his certain, orderly world shift beneath his feet for the very first time. He did not yet understand the half of it. He did not know about the tonic. He did not know what the physician would find. He did not know that the woman he had brought into his house to charm and to please, the beautiful rich widow, was not rich at all, and was not what she seemed, and had been very busy indeed in the quiet dark hours of that great cold house. But he was beginning, dimly, to understand one thing. He had made a terrible mistake, and the reckoning had just walked through his gate. The physician came before dawn. He was not a fashionable London man with soft hands and softer opinions. He was Dr. Merrick, a lean, gray, plain-spoken man the dowager had roused from his bed by the sheer force of her name and a purse of gold, and he arrived with the snow still on his coat and a black leather bag in his hand, and no interest whatsoever in the rank of anyone in the room. He asked for the sick room to be cleared. When Lady Vesey lingered by the door, he looked at her over his spectacles and said, "Madam, I asked for everyone. That includes you." And she went, though her eyes as she went were not the eyes of a frightened woman. They were the eyes of a woman calculating. Only the dowager was permitted to stay, and Mrs. Fenwick, who had returned at first light to find her mistress transformed, a great lady on her knees by the Duchess's bed, and the widow banished, and the whole house turned upside down in a single night. Mrs. Fenwick had taken one look at the Dowager Duchess of Cranley, and understood, with a housekeeper's swift instinct, that here at last was an ally, and she had thrown herself into the old woman's service with a devotion that spoke volumes about how long she had waited for anyone to come. Dr. Merrick examined Charlotte for a long time. He asked questions low and steady. When had the sickness begun? How had it come all at once or by degrees? What had she eaten? What had she drunk? He listened to her heart. He looked at her eyes, her nails, the pale skin of her wrists. He asked to see her tongue, and when he did, something in his face went very still. Then he picked up the small glass on the bedside table, the tonic, the sweet cordial that Lady Vesey had given her every night with her own soft white hands, and he held it to the gray morning light, and he swirled it, and he smelled it, and last of all, to the dowager's alarm, he touched a single drop to the tip of his tongue, and then spat it at once into his handkerchief. He set the glass down very carefully, as a man sets down something dangerous. "How long," he said quietly, "has she been taking this?" "Weeks," said Mrs. Fenwick before the dowager could answer. The housekeeper's voice was shaking. "Weeks, sir. Every night. That Lady Vesey brought it to her herself and stood over her till she drank it. I thought, God forgive me, I thought it was medicine." "Who is she?" Merrick asked. "This Lady Vesey." "A friend of the family," said the dowager, and the words were ice. "So she says." Dr. Merrick was silent for a moment. Then he drew the dowager aside, to the window, and he lowered his voice so that the girl in the bed would not hear. "Your Grace," he said, "I will not dress this in soft words, for I think you are not a woman who wants them. This young lady is not ill, not in the way this house believes. There is no fever of the blood, no weakness of the constitution, no disease that I can find. What I find instead are the signs, all of them, plain as print to a man who has seen it before, of poison, given slowly, given patiently, given in small doses over many weeks so that the decline would look natural. So that it would look, to anyone who did not care to look closely, like a delicate girl simply fading away." The dowager's hand tightened white upon her cane. "You are certain?" "As certain as I have ever been of anything. Another week of that cordial, your Grace, perhaps two, and she would have died. And every soul in this house would have said, poor thing, she was always so weak, and they would have buried her, and no one would ever have asked a single question." His gray eyes were hard. "It is very well done. It is the work of someone patient and clever and quite without a conscience. Whoever has been giving her that glass each night has been murdering her by inches, and meant to get clean away with it." For a long moment the Dowager Duchess of Cranley said nothing at all. When she spoke, her voice was terribly calm, and that calm was more frightening than any rage. "Can you save her?" "I believe so. She is young and stronger than she looks, or she would be dead already. Stop the poison, and time and care will do the rest. But it must be stopped now, and she must be watched every hour, and nothing must pass her lips that you and I have not seen prepared with our own eyes. Because whoever did this," and here the doctor glanced toward the door, toward the great house beyond it, "is still under this roof. And when they learn that she is not dying after all, When they learn that a physician has been and has seen what I have seen, they will not simply give up and go home. No, the dowager agreed softly. No, they will not. And she was right. Below stairs, Lady Vasey was already moving. She was not a woman who panicked. She had been in tight corners before, tighter than this and with less to work with, and she had learned long ago that the moment a scheme began to slip was precisely the moment to appear most calm, most wounded, most innocent. So when the Duke found her in the morning room, pale and lovely and dabbing at her eyes with a scrap of lace, she did not rage. She wept. "Oh, Julian," she breathed, "that dreadful old woman. The things she said to me. As though I had done something wicked when I have done nothing but nurse your poor wife with my own 2 hands, night after night, while everyone else in this house abandoned her." The Duke stood stiffly by the fire. He was not, this morning, entirely the man he had been. The night had shaken something loose in him. "The Dowager of Cranley," he said slowly, "does not strike me as a woman who says things without cause." Lady Vasey went very still behind her handkerchief. "She is Charlotte's godmother," the Duke went on, half to himself. "Her father's dearest friend. She has spent 3 months searching for her, and He stopped. He was remembering now things he had not let himself think about. The physician he had summoned in the beginning, the fashionable London man who had glanced at Charlotte for 10 minutes and pronounced it nerves. That man had been Lady Vasey's friend. Lady Vasey had recommended him. Lady Vasey had insisted on him. And it was Lady Vasey who had taken over the sick room. Lady Vasey who had sent Mrs. Fenwick away on errands. Lady Vasey who had told the servants not to answer the Duchess's bell. Lady Vasey who brought the tonic every single night and stood and watched her drink it. "Julian," the widow's voice had changed. The tears were gone. She rose and came to him and laid one soft hand upon his arm, and her eyes, when he looked into them, were as beautiful and as cold as he had ever seen them. "You are tired. You have had a dreadful fright. You are letting a spiteful old woman put wicked ideas into your head. Think, my darling, think what you are imagining, and think," her fingers tightened just slightly on his arm, "think how it would look, a poisoning. In the house of the Duke of Wexcombe, the scandal, the ruin, your name, your great name, already so fragile, already so deep in debt, dragged through every gutter paper in England. They would not ask who did it, Julian. They would only ask why you did not know. A man cannot poison his own wife in his own house, they will say, without his hand in it somewhere." The Duke went cold. "I did nothing," he said. "Of course you did nothing." She smiled up at him, gentle as a knife. "You and I know that, but the world sees a cold husband who neglected his sick wife, a husband with a beautiful woman living under his roof, a husband drowning in debt who would be a great deal more comfortable a widower than a husband, would he not? That is what the world will see, my love. That is the story they will tell. Unless," she let it hang. "Unless what?" "Unless she recovers quietly and the old woman is sent on her way and this ugly business is forgotten. No physicians, no questions, no scandal. Let the dowager fuss over her precious goddaughter if she must, but keep it in this house, Julian, keep it quiet, and in a little while it will all blow over, and no one need ever know that anything was amiss at all." And the Duke of Wexcombe, weak in the way that truly mattered, weak where it counted, a coward dressed in a duke's fine coat, felt the awful pull of it, because she was right about one thing. A scandal would finish him. And it would be so easy, so very easy to tell himself it was all a misunderstanding, a mistake, an old woman's spite. So easy to look away, as he had looked away from everything unpleasant his whole life long. He might have done it too. But at that moment the door opened, and the Dowager Duchess of Cranley stood upon the threshold, and behind her stood Dr. Merrick with his black bag and his grim gray face, and the Dowager said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "Dr. Merrick has completed his examination, and he has a great deal to tell you, Julian, about exactly what has been in that glass your friend here has been feeding your wife each night. I think," she said, and her cold eyes went to Lady Vasey and stayed there, that we should all sit down, and I think that this lady in particular should stay precisely where she is. Lady Vasey's hand slipped from the Duke's arm. For the first time since she had swept into Wexcombe Hall in her half-mourning silks, the beautiful widow looked, for just one moment, truly afraid. But only for a moment, because women like Lady Vasey do not go down without a fight, and she had one card left to play, a card so bold and so cruel that not one soul in that room saw it coming. She lifted her chin. She looked the Dowager Duchess of Cranley dead in the eye. And she began to scream for the servants, crying out that the Duchess had gone mad, that the poor sick girl had tried to poison herself, and that these wicked people were trying to blame an innocent widow to cover up the shame of it. The screaming brought the servants running. They crowded into the doorway, half-dressed and frightened, and there stood Lady Vasey in the middle of the room, her hands pressed to her breast, tears streaming down her lovely face, crying out that the whole world had gone mad. She did it to herself, the widow sobbed. The poor creature, her mind has been unwell for weeks. Everyone has seen it, everyone knows she has been taking something, some dreadful thing. I found the bottle myself and I have been trying to keep it from her. I have been protecting her, and now this old woman comes and twists it all and blames me, when all I have ever done is love this family and try to help. It was masterful, it was monstrous, and for one sick, swaying moment it worked. Because the servants did not know what to believe. They had seen the Duchess waste away. They had heard from Lady Vasey's own gentle lips the whispers of a delicate mind, a nervous girl, a poor thing not built for the world. It fit. It was the story they had already been told, and people will always reach for the story they already know. And the Duke wanted to believe it. Every coward's instinct in him strained toward it. If Charlotte had done this to herself, then there was no crime, no scandal, no poisoner under his roof, no ruin waiting to swallow his great name. If Charlotte had done this to herself, then he need not look at his own part in it, need not think about the nights he had left her alone, need not remember stepping over her body on the floor. It would all so conveniently be her fault. As so many things in Julian's comfortable life had somehow always turned out to be someone else's fault. He turned to the Dowager. Perhaps, he said, and hated the weakness in his own voice even as he spoke, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Lady Vasey has been most devoted, if the poor girl's mind is troubled. Her mind, said Dr. Merrick, is as sound as yours. Sounder, I should think, on this morning's evidence. But the Duke pressed on, grasping. You cannot know that. You have examined her for one night. Lady Vasey has been with her for weeks. Yes, said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley. Lady Vasey has been with her for weeks. That is rather the point. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply took a single step forward, and the whole room seemed to quiet around her, and she looked at the weeping widow with an expression of such cold and total contempt that even the servants fell silent. Let us test this story of yours, madam, she said. You say the Duchess poisoned herself. You say you found the bottle. Then you will not object, I am sure, to Dr. Merrick examining every one of your own possessions this very hour in front of these witnesses. You will not object to a search of your rooms, your trunks, your traveling case. For if the poison came from the Duchess's own hand, then we shall find nothing in yours, shall we? And if we do find something, the old woman's eyes glittered, then we shall know precisely whose hand has been at work. The blood drained from Lady Vasey's face. It was very slight. She recovered in an instant, drew herself up, laughed a light and scornful laugh. But the Dowager had seen it, and Dr. Merrick had seen it, and for the first time Julian had seen it too. That flicker, that fear, that was not the face of an innocent woman. This is an outrage, Lady Vasey said. I will not be searched like a common thief. Mrs. Fenwick, The dowager did not take her eyes from the widow. "You have kept the keys of this house for 30 years. I imagine you know how to find your way into a locked trunk." "That I do, your grace," said Mrs. Fenwick, and there was grim satisfaction in every syllable. "Julian," the dowager turned to the Duke, and now her voice was a lash. "You are the master of this house, or you are meant to be. A woman has been poisoned under your roof. Your wife. The lady whose father saved yours from ruin and disgrace, though clearly no one troubled to teach you that. Will you stand here and let the creature who did it walk free because you are frightened of a little scandal? Is your name worth so much to you, and your wife's life worth so little?" And Julian, caught between the two women, the cold, beautiful liar who offered him the easy path, and the old woman who offered him only the hard and shameful truth, stood frozen at the great crossroads of his life. He was not a good man. He knew that dimly even then. But somewhere beneath the vanity and the cowardice and the years of looking away, there was one small thing that had not quite died. The memory of his father, the old Duke, who had been many things but never a coward, telling him once when he was a boy that a Wexcombe pays his debts and stands by his own and never, ever hides behind a woman's skirts. "Search her," said the Duke of Wexcombe, his voice cracked on it. "Search the rooms." Lady Vesey's face contorted. "Julian." "Search them," he said again, louder, and turned away from her so that he would not have to see her face. They found it within the hour. Mrs. Fenwick, her keys jangling like a hangman's, opened the widow's traveling case with the ease of long practice. And there, beneath a false panel in the bottom, clever, but not clever enough for a woman who had been hiding the household silver from thieving footmen for 3 decades, she found a small stoppered bottle of dark glass. Dr. Merrick took it to the window and unstoppered it and smelled it, and his face when he turned back to the room was answer enough. "The same," he said quietly, "the very same that is in the cordial. There can be no doubt at all." The room went utterly silent. And Lady Vesey, cornered at last, stripped of her lies, with the proof of her guilt sitting in a doctor's gray hand, did the only thing left to a woman like her. She stopped pretending. The tears dried on her face as though they had never been. The soft, trembling mouth went hard and flat, and when she looked around the room now, at the Duke and the Dowager and the gaping servants, it was with open, undisguised contempt, the look of a predator who has been caught, and knows it, and despises the fools who caught her almost as much as she despises herself for being caught. "Well," she said, "how very tiresome." The Duke stared at her as though he had never seen her before. "Genevieve." "Oh, do stop bleating my name," she laughed, a real laugh now, low and ugly. "You poor, stupid, gilded fool, did you really believe it, any of it, that I came to this cold, crumbling, mortgaged ruin of a house for love of you?" She looked him up and down with withering scorn. "You have nothing, Julian. Do you understand that? Nothing. This house is a shell. The lands are mortgaged to the roof. You are drowning in debt so deep you cannot even see the bottom of it, and you dine off borrowed silver and pretend you are a great man. I have known it from the start. Everyone in London knows it. You are a joke, my darling. A beautiful, well-dressed joke." Every word landed like a slap. The servants stared at the floor. The Duke stood white and rigid and could not speak. "So why," said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley, very quietly, "did you come?" Lady Vesey's eyes slid to her, and something crafty and vicious moved in them. "Why do you think, you interfering old crow?" she said. "For the same reason as everyone, the money." "There is no money," said the Duke hollowly. "She has just said it herself. I have nothing." "You have nothing," Lady Vesey agreed, turning back to him with a smile of pure poison. "But she does." And she pointed one white finger at the door beyond which Charlotte lay. "Your little gray mouse of a wife. Your sad, sickly, penniless bride that your father saddled you with out of some sentimental old debt. Did you never wonder, Julian, did you never once wonder why your father, on his deathbed, drowning in debt, was so very determined that you should marry that particular nobody. A gentleman's daughter with no fortune, no title, no connections worth the having. The Duke stared at her. She has no fortune. Her father was a man of modest means. It was charity, my father's charity. Lady Vasey threw back her head and laughed, and it was the cruelest sound in the world. Charity, she cried. Oh, you truly do not know, you truly have no idea. This is almost worth it just to see your face. She leaned toward him, savoring it. Your wife, you fool, is the richest woman in 3 counties, and you never even knew. The silence that followed was so complete that the fire's crackle seemed loud as thunder. It was the dowager who broke it, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. It was slow and deliberate, and there was in it the first faint note of something almost like grim satisfaction, the sound of a trap that someone else had built now swinging shut on them all. She is right, said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley, though I had meant to tell you rather more gently, Julian, and rather later, but since the creature has let the cat out, yes, it is true. She moved to the fire and stood, and looked into the flames and told them. Charlotte's father was no rich man, that is true enough, not in lands, not in houses, but he was the cleverest man of business I ever knew, and quietly, over 30 years, with never a word of boast, he built a fortune in the new way, in trade, in shipping, in the banks and the funds and the great machines of this changing age. A fortune vast enough to buy this house and every acre round it 10 times over and never feel the loss. He trusted no one with it. He hid it well. And when he knew he was dying, and knew his daughter would be alone and unprotected and prey to every fortune hunter in England, her eyes flicked once to Lady Vasey. He did a wise and careful thing. He placed the whole of it in trust, locked away where no husband's hand could touch it, no debt could swallow it, no schemer could steal it, to be managed and protected until his daughter should come of age and be judged safe and settled by the one person in all the world he trusted above every other. The dowager turned from the fire, and she looked not at the Duke, but around the room at all of them with the calm and terrible authority of a queen. By me, she said, I am the trustee of Charlotte's fortune, every penny of it. It has been under my hand and my protection since the day her father died. And that, Julian, that is why I have torn England apart these 3 months to find her, not merely because I loved her father, not merely because I made him a promise, but because I hold in trust a fortune that could raise this ruined house from the dead 10 times over, and it belongs, every last farthing of it, to the girl your friend here has been quietly murdering upstairs. She let that settle. She watched it break over them like a wave. You wanted my favor, Julian, she said softly. You wrote to me, twice, begging for my notice, my blessing, a word in the right ear to save your sinking name. And all the while, the salvation of your house lay dying on your bedroom floor, and you stepped over her to go and dine with the woman who was killing her. Her voice dropped, and it was the coldest thing any of them had ever heard. You had everything you needed to save yourself, and you treated it like refuse. You are, I think, the greatest fool I have met in 70 years of life. The Duke of Wexcombe sank slowly into a chair, his face the color of ash. And Lady Vasey, standing forgotten in the middle of the room, began to understand, a heartbeat too late, that in her fury to wound the Duke, she had just handed the Dowager the last piece of a weapon that would destroy them both. Because now everyone in the room knew what was truly at stake, and the fortune, the house, the future, all of it, rested entirely in the small, thin hands of a girl lying in the next room. A girl who had every reason in the world, when she was well enough to speak, to see the both of them ruined. Charlotte grew stronger by the day. It was slow at first, a little color returning to her cheeks, a little strength to her hands, but Dr. Merrick had been right. She was younger and stronger than her wasted body had suggested, and once the poison was stopped and true care began, her body remembered how to live. Within a week she could sit up, Within 2 she could walk on the dowager's arm to the window and back. The broth that Mrs. Fenwick made her now was tasted first by the housekeeper's own lips before it ever came near her mistress, and the door of the sick-room was guarded day and night, and no one who was not trusted came within a dozen feet of her. And through those long days of mending, it was Dr. Merrick who came each morning and each evening, in his plain dark coat, with his black bag and his blunt kind manner, to sit by her bed and mark her progress. He was not a young man, but he was not so very old either, perhaps 40, gray before his time from too many nights at too many bedsides, and he had a quiet, steady way about him that Charlotte, who had known so little steadiness in her life, found she trusted almost at once. He did not speak to her the way the others always had, as though she were fragile or foolish or a burden to be managed. He spoke to her as though she were a person of sense. He told her plainly what had been done to her and how, and he did not soften it because he had understood quite quickly that she did not want it softened. He answered her questions. He listened to her answers. And slowly, in the safe gray mornings, Charlotte began to talk, really talk, as she had not talked to a living soul since her father died, and Dr. Merrick listened to all of it, and something quiet and warm and unhurried began to grow in that sick-room, though neither of them yet gave it a name. Downstairs, the reckoning came for Lady Vesey. The Dowager Duchess of Cranley was not a woman to leave a thing half done. While Charlotte mended, the old woman had been busy writing letters, summoning men of law and setting quiet, powerful wheels in motion. And it did not take long, once she began truly to look, for the whole rotten truth of the beautiful widow to come tumbling out. Lady Vesey was not Lady Vesey at all. There had been a real Lord Vesey once, it was true, an elderly, wealthy, foolish man who had married a beautiful woman late in life and died, most conveniently, within the year. But the fortune everyone assumed she had inherited had never existed. The old lord had been as deep in debt as Julian himself, and had left his widow nothing but a great name and a mountain of creditors. And so she had done what she had done before in other cities under other names. For the men of law the dowager summoned soon turned up a long gray trail of them. A merchant in Bristol, dead of a wasting sickness, his fortune signed over to a beautiful companion in his final weeks. A widower in Bath, the same. An old spinster with no heirs and a great deal of money, who had taken on a charming lady's companion and had not lived out the year. Always the same pattern. Always a lonely person with money and no one to watch over them. Always a slow decline that everyone put down to age or grief or a delicate constitution. And always, at the end of it, the charming companion walking quietly away a little richer, before anyone thought to ask a single hard question. She had come to Wexcombe not for Julian. Julian was worthless to her, a bankrupt fool in a fine coat, but the moment she had glimpsed the true prize, she had changed her aim with a serpent's ease. She had learned somehow, in whatever dark corners such creatures trade their secrets, what almost no one else in England knew, that the grey little Duchess of Wexcombe was in truth an heiress of enormous fortune, and so she had set herself to the patient work she knew so well: remove the girl, console the grieving widower, marry the ruined duke once he was free, and, in time, quietly free herself of him too and walk away with everything. It was all there in the end, laid out in the cold, clean hand of the law. The false name, the buried husbands, the poison, the pattern, Dr. Merrick's testimony, the bottle from the trunk, Mrs. Fenwick's account of the nightly cordial, the word of a dowager duchess whom no magistrate in England would dare to doubt. When the men came for her at last, grave men with a warrant, in the grey light of a winter morning, Lady Vesey did not weep, and she did not scream. She had done with pretending. She simply looked around the cold marble hall of Wexcombe with those beautiful, empty eyes, and she smiled a small, bitter smile, as though the whole world had merely proved as tiresome and disappointing as she had always known it would. "You think you have won," she said to the dowager as they led her out. "You have won nothing. There will be another house. There is always another house. There are always fools. Her gaze slid to Julian, standing broken by the wall. And there is always a man too vain and too weak to see what is in front of his own face. Perhaps, said the Dowager Duchess of Cranley calmly, but it will not be this house, and it will not be for a very long time where you are going. Take her away. And they took her away, out through the great gate she had swept through so grandly 3 months before, and the doors of Wexcombe Hall closed behind her, and she was gone. That left Julian. He had not spoken much in those weeks. Something in him had broken on the morning of the search, and it had not mended. He wandered the cold rooms of his great ruined house like a ghost, and he did not go near his wife's sick room, partly because the Dowager had forbidden it, and partly, though he would not have admitted it, because he could not bear to. For here was the thing that gnawed at Julian, Duke of Wexcombe, in the long sleepless nights. He had not known. He had not known about the poison. That at least was true, and the law had found it true, and even the Dowager who despised him did not accuse him of it. He was no murderer. When he had stepped over his wife on that cold floor, he had believed, because he had wanted to believe, because believing it was easy, that she was merely weak, merely ailing, merely the tiresome, fading girl that Lady Vesey had so patiently painted for him. He had not known there was poison in the glass. But and this was the splinter that would not come out, the truth he could not look away from now, that there was no one left to blame. He should have known. A better man would have known. A husband who had ever once truly looked at his wife, who had ever sat by her bed, who had ever asked her a single question, who had cared for her even the smallest amount, such a man would have seen, would have wondered, would have asked why a healthy girl was wasting away in his house, and would not have rested until he had the answer. He had not looked. He had not wondered. He had not cared. He had been so busy with his vanity and his debts and his beautiful poisonous guest that his own wife had come within a week of death beneath his roof, and he had noticed less than the housekeeper did. He was not a murderer. He was only a man so cold, so selfish, so wholly absorbed in himself, that murder had been able to walk in through his front door and do its quiet work for months, and he had held the door open and never once looked to see who was passing through. And now that he understood at last who his wife was, what she was worth, what she might have been to him, now it was far, far too late. He had shown her nothing but cruelty and cold. He had stepped over her body. She had every reason under heaven to despise him. And she held in those small mending hands not only a fortune that could save his drowning house, but the simple power to cast him out of her life forever and never think of him again. Julian, Duke of Wexcombe, sat alone in the dark of his study, among the mortgaged splendor of his dying name, and for the first time in his adult life, he wept not for his house, and not for his fortune, but out of pure, plain shame. Upstairs, Charlotte was well enough now to know all of it. The Dowager had told her everything, gently but completely, the poison, the widow, the trust, the fortune that had been hers all along. And Charlotte had listened, pale and quiet, and had said very little, and had turned it all over slowly in her mind as she grew stronger by the hour. She understood now the shape of the trap she had been caught in. She understood how close she had come to dying unmourned on a cold floor. And she understood, too, the strange new power that had come into her hands, that she was not, and never had been, the penniless nobody they had all believed her to be, but a woman of great fortune, with a fierce and mighty protector, and the whole world suddenly opened before her. She did not have to stay. That was the wonder of it, the thing she turned over and over in the gray mornings. She was young. She would soon be, well. She was rich beyond anything she had dreamed and free, and there was not a single chain in all the world that bound her to this cold house or the cold man who had brought her to it. You need never see him again, child, the Dowager told her, sitting by her bed one evening holding her hand. The marriage was his father's doing, forced upon you both when you were grieving and alone. There are ways I have already spoken to the lawyers that such a marriage might be quietly set aside, unmade as though it had never been. You would be free, free and rich and young, and you might have any life you chose. You owe that man nothing, less than nothing. You owe him only the door." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, looking at the fire. And then, softly, she asked the question that would decide everything. "And Dr. Merrick," she said, not quite meeting the old woman's eyes, a faint color rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. Will he still come, when I am well, when there is no more need of a physician in the house?" The Dowager Duchess of Cranley, who missed nothing, and who had watched a great many things bloom in a great many sick rooms in her 70 years, looked at the color in her goddaughter's face, and at the careful way she said the doctor's name, and something in the old woman's fierce heart grew very warm and very glad. "My dear," she said gently and pressed the girl's hand, "I rather think that can be arranged." Spring came slowly to Wexcombe Hall. The snow that had lain so long upon the fields melted at last into gray water and black earth, and the first green things pushed up through the cold ground, and the light that came through the tall windows grew warmer by the day. And with the turning of the season, Charlotte grew well. Not merely better, well, truly wholly well in a way she had not been for many months, and she was beginning to understand in a way she had not been for far longer than that. Because it was not only the poison that had left her body now. It was the fear, the loneliness, the slow, grinding certainty that she was unwanted, unloved, and utterly alone in the world, which had been a poison of its own, and had been killing her by inches long before Lady Vasey ever poured a drop into her glass. That, too, had begun to lift, for she was not alone anymore, and she never would be again. She had her godmother, fierce and mighty and endlessly tender, who had turned the whole of her formidable will to the single task of Charlotte's happiness. She had Mrs. Fenwick, who fussed over her like a hen with one chick, and wept with joy the first morning her mistress came down the great stair on her own 2 feet. And she had Dr. Merrick. She had Dr. Merrick, who came still each day, though there was hardly a medical need for it any longer, and who no longer carried his black bag when he came, and who sat with her now not by a sickbed but in the morning room or the garden in the growing warmth of the spring, and talked with her of 100 things that had nothing at all to do with physic. Books, the old days, her father, whom he had never met but loved to hear of. His own life, quiet and hardworking and rather lonely, given over to the care of strangers. They talked, and they laughed. Charlotte, who had almost forgotten how to laugh, found it came back to her more easily every day, and sometimes they sat in a silence so easy and so warm that it said more than any words could. Neither of them spoke of what was growing between them. There was no need. It grew all the same, quiet and deep and sure, the way the green things grew up out of the cold ground, needing no one's leave. But before any new life could truly begin, there was an old one that had to be ended. And Charlotte, who was no longer weak in any way that mattered, knew that she could not simply run from it. She would not creep away from Wexcombe Hall in the night like a frightened girl. She would walk out of it in her own time with her head high, and before she did, she would face the man who had brought her here one last time, and she would say to him the things that needed to be said. She chose the morning. She chose the great cold drawing room with its mortgaged splendor and its long windows full of spring light, and she asked the Dowager gently to let her do it alone. "Are you certain, my dear?" the old woman asked, searching her face. "You need not see him at all, you know, not ever. The lawyers can manage every particle of it. You need never be in the same room with that man again as long as you live." "I know," said Charlotte, "but I want to, not for his sake." She smiled, a small, steady smile that had a great deal of her father in it. "For mine. I have spent my whole life being spoken to and spoken for and decided about by other people. My father, God rest him, arranged my marriage before I was old enough to be asked. Julian told me on our wedding day exactly what I was to expect from my own life. Lady Vasey decided I should die. Everyone always has decided things about me while I lay still and let them. Her chin lifted. I should like just once to be the one who does the deciding, and I should like him to see me do it. The Dowager Duchess of Cranley looked at her goddaughter for a long moment, and then she rose, and she took the girl's face in her two old hands, and she kissed her forehead. Your father, she said, her voice not quite steady, would be so very proud of the woman you have become. Go on, then. I shall be just beyond the door, not because you need me, but because I should not miss it for the world. So Charlotte went in alone. Julian was waiting for her, standing by the cold hearth, and Charlotte, seeing him for the first time in many weeks, was struck by how much he had changed. The fine dark coat still fit him well, the handsome jaw was still handsome, but the arrogance was gone out of him, wholly gone, and without it he seemed smaller, grayer, older. He had the look of a man who has not slept in a long time. He had the look of a man who has finally, at terrible cost, begun to see himself clearly and cannot bear the sight. When she entered, he flinched, as though the light of her had struck him. Charlotte, he said, and then, as if the word did not fit right in his mouth, as if he had no right to it, Your Grace, I thank you for coming. You need not have, I know that. She said nothing. She crossed the room slowly. She could cross a room easily now, and there was a strength in the way she moved that had not been there before, and she stood before him, straight and calm, and she looked at him. She simply looked at him, at the man who had stepped over her body on the floor, and she let him feel the weight of her looking. He could not hold it. His eyes fell. I have rehearsed this 100 times, he said to the carpet. What I would say to you if you ever gave me the chance. And now you are here, and I find there are no words in the world that are not an insult coming from me. There is no apology large enough, I know that. I am not fool enough to think there is anything I can say that could touch what I did to you, what I let be done to you. He drew a shaking breath. I did not know about the poison. I swear that to you before God. But I know now that it does not matter, that it is almost worse, because I should have known. Any husband worth the name would have known, and I did not even look at you. I did not even look. Charlotte was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and level, and it did not shake at all. No, she said, you did not. He flinched again. Do you know, she went on in that same steady voice, what I thought about Julian on the nights I lay awake and sick and alone in that room, listening to you laugh with her downstairs. I did not think about the fortune I did not know I had. I did not think about revenge. I was too tired for revenge. I thought about something very small. I thought if only he would come. If only he would come and sit with me for 1 hour, not love me. I had given up on love long before. I only wanted him to come and sit so that I would not be so alone. That was all I wanted in the world. 1 hour of not being alone. She paused. You never came. And then at the very end, when I was dying on the floor, you did come, and you stepped over me, and you went to her. Charlotte, his voice broke entirely. I'm not saying it to wound you, she said, and it was true. There was no cruelty in her, only a clear and final honesty. I am saying it because it is true, and because I think you should have to hear it once from me in my own words before we are done. You did not poison me, but you left me to it. You made this house a place where such a thing could happen and no one would stop it because you had made it a place with no love in it at all. That is what you did. And I have decided that I am not going to carry it anymore. I am going to set it down here in this room with you, and I am going to walk out and leave it behind me, and I am not going to think of it again. She let that settle, and then she said the thing she had come to say. I am not going to stay married to you, Julian. He closed his eyes. He had known it was coming, had known it, surely, since the morning of the search, and yet the words landed on him like a blow all the same. My godmother has spoken to the lawyers, Charlotte went on, calm and clear. The marriage was made without my true consent. I was a grieving girl of 19, alone, given no choice, told only that it was arranged. There are grounds enough, they tell me, to have it set aside. quietly, cleanly, as though it had never been. And that is what I have chosen to do. I am going to be free of it, and free of you. Of course, Julian whispered. Of course, you should, you must, I would never, I will not contest it, anything you wish, anything at all. He looked up at her then, and there were tears on his face and no shame left in him to hide them. You owe me nothing, Charlotte, less than nothing. I know what this means for me. I know what walks out the door with you. He gave a terrible, hollow laugh. The whole world knew before I did. The fortune that could have saved this house. My name, everything. It all leaves with you, and I will be left with the ruin I built, and it is no more than I deserve. It is a great deal less than I deserve. His voice failed, and he mastered it and went on. I only want you to know that I understand at last exactly what I threw away. Not the money, you. I threw away you, and I will have the rest of my life in this cold, empty house to think of it. And there it was, the moment the whole story had been building toward. The proud Duke brought low, the cold man weeping, the fortune and the future and the woman herself, all of it, resting in Charlotte's small hands, hers to give or to withhold. She could have softened. A weaker story, a lesser woman, might have softened here, might have seen the tears and felt the old foolish pull of pity and stayed. Charlotte did not soften, because she had learned at great cost the difference between a man who is sorry for what he has lost and a man who is sorry for what he has done. And she was not at all certain that Julian yet knew the difference himself. And even if his sorrow was true and deep and real, it did not change the plain fact that had crystallized in her, clear as ice, through all those long mending weeks. She did not want this life. She did not want this cold house, or this broken man, or the endless work of teaching him, year by weary year, to be something he had never once tried to be when it might have saved her. She had one life. She had very nearly lost it, and she was not going to spend what was left of it repairing a man who had stepped over her body on the floor. I believe you, she said at last and gently. I believe that you are sorry. I even believe that you have changed or begun to. And I am glad of it, Julian, not for my sake, but for your own and for the sake of whatever comes after for you. I hope you become a better man than the one who married me. I truly do. She paused. But I will not be the one who stays to see it. That is not my task. It was never my task. I did not come into this world to be the cure for what is wrong with you. She drew a breath, and when she spoke again, there was something almost like peace in her voice. I am going to have a life, Julian. A real one full of warmth with people who choose me and whom I choose. I am going to be happy. I have decided that too, and there is no room in that life for you. There is no anger in it either. I have set that down, as I told you I would. But there is no room. You will have to find your own way out of the dark. It is not mine to light. And with that she turned to go. Charlotte, his voice stopped her at the door, not commanding as it once would have been, but pleading small. The house, the debts, without your fortune I will lose everything. Wexcombe, my name, all of it, I am ruined. She looked back at him, and in her face there was neither triumph nor pity, but only a clear and final justice. Yes, she said simply, you are, but you were ruined before I ever came, Julian. You were ruined the day you decided that other people were things to be stepped over. The debts only came due a little later than the rest. She held his gaze one last moment. Goodbye. I do hope you find your way. I will not be thinking of whether you do. And Charlotte, Duchess of Wexcombe, soon to be Charlotte of no title at all, and gladder of it than she could say, walked out of that cold drawing-room, and out of that cold marriage, and out of that cold house, with her head high and her step sure, and she did not look back again. Beyond the door, the Dowager Duchess of Cranley was waiting as she had promised. She said nothing. She only opened her arms, and Charlotte walked into them, and the old woman held her fierce and close, and over the girl's shoulder cast one last glance into the drawing-room, one look, at the broken man standing alone by his cold hearth in his mortgaged house, and then she turned her back on him forever, and led her goddaughter away toward the light of the open door. Dr. Merrick was waiting in the hall. He had not been asked to wait. He had simply come that morning, as he had come every morning, and when he had understood what was happening behind the drawing-room doors, he had not been able to make himself leave. So he stood there, turning his hat in his hands, a plain gray man in a plain dark coat, and when Charlotte came down the hall on her godmother's arm, free at last, her face wet and shining, he looked up at her, and everything he had never dared to say was written plainly in his honest face. Charlotte stopped before him. For a moment neither of them spoke. "You waited," she said. "Yes," said Dr. Merrick. Yes, I did not mean to. I did not want to intrude upon. I only found I could not go." He swallowed. Forgive me, are you well?" And Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, warm and bright and full of a life that had very nearly been snuffed out on a cold floor, and had instead come blazing back. And she took the plain gray man's arm, right there in the great hall of Wexcombe, in front of her godmother and Mrs. Fenwick and God and everyone. "Yes," she said, "do you know, I believe I am very well indeed." And the three of them, the fierce old Duchess, the mended girl, and the good gray doctor who had never once, in all those long weeks, looked at her as anything less than a person of worth, walked out together through the great gate of Wexcombe Hall, into the warm spring morning, and left the cold house and the cold man behind them. Behind them, in the empty drawing-room, Julian, Duke of Wexcombe, stood alone at last with the ruin he had made, and listened to the sound of the carriage wheels growing fainter on the drive, the very sound that had heralded his undoing 3 months and a lifetime ago, until at last it faded altogether, and there was nothing left but silence, and the cold, and the long echoing emptiness of everything he had thrown away. 1 year later, on a soft green morning in early summer, there was a wedding in a small stone church in the countryside, and it was, by the account of everyone who was there, the happiest wedding they had ever seen. It was not a grand affair. There were no crowds of titled strangers, no cold marble halls, no mortgage splendor bought on borrowed credit. There was a little country church, very old and very beautiful, with sunlight pouring through its narrow windows and wildflowers gathered in every corner, and there were perhaps 30 people in the pews. But every one of those 30 people was there because they loved the bride or the groom or both, and had come with a whole and gladdened heart. And that, as the Dowager Duchess of Cranley remarked to Mrs. Fenwick as they waited for the bride, was worth more than 300 fashionable guests who would not have cared whether you lived or died. "It is indeed, your grace," said Mrs. Fenwick, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that was already quite soaked through. "Oh, it is indeed. If you had seen her a year ago, your grace, no, forgive me, you did see her. You know, you saw, and to see her now." "I know," said the Dowager gently. "I know, my good woman. Now dry your eyes or you will set me off, and I have a reputation to consider." But her own eyes were suspiciously bright. For the change in Charlotte over that single year had been a thing to marvel at. The wasted, dying girl who had lain upon a cold floor was gone so completely that it was hard now to believe she had ever existed. In her place was a young woman in the full bloom of health and happiness, her cheeks flushed with color, her eyes bright, her figure strong and rounded where once it had been nothing but sharp bones and shadow. She laughed easily now, and often. She rode out in the mornings as she had loved to do as a girl. She had a garden of her own again, the way her mother had, and she was forever coming in from it with earth on her hands and flowers in her arms, and her face turned up to the sun. She had, in short, come fully back to life, and more than that, she had grown into a life larger and warmer and freer than any she had known even before her troubles began. She had a home now, a real one. With her fortune restored to her hand at last, and her godmother's wise counsel to guide it, Charlotte had bought a fine old manor house in a green and gentle county, not grand and cold like Wexcombe, but warm and bright and full of light. A house where people laughed in the halls, and the fires were always lit, and no one ever was left alone and unwanted in a dark room. She had filled it with good people. She had made it, quite deliberately and with her whole heart, the very opposite of the house she had nearly died in. And she had made it a home, above all, with the man who now stood waiting for her at the front of the little church, turning his hat in his hands out of pure nervousness, though he had long since ceased to be a nervous man. Dr. Merrick, plain, gray, kind Dr. Merrick, had courted her slowly and gently over that year, in no hurry at all, letting her come to him in her own time, never once pressing, never once making her feel that she owed him a single thing. He had gone on with his work, tending the sick of the county, rich and poor alike, asking nothing of her. And Charlotte, who had spent her whole life being wanted only for what she could give, a debt to be settled, a fortune to be seized, had found, in this good man who wanted only her company and asked for nothing else, something she had never had in all her life: the simple, steady, unglamorous certainty of being truly and safely loved. When he had at last asked her to marry him, haltingly, blushing, quite sure she would say no, quite unable to believe a woman of such fortune would look twice at a country doctor, she had laughed and cried, and said yes before he had even finished the question. "You are certain?" he had asked, still hardly daring. "Charlotte, you could have any man in England, a lord, a duke, even a proper one this time. You have a fortune, a name, your godmother's connections, the whole world is open to you, and I am only—" "You are only the first person in my whole life," she had said, taking his plain, kind face in her two hands, "who ever looked at me and saw a person instead of a prize. You sat by my bed when I was nothing and nobody and dying, and you spoke to me as though I mattered when not one soul in that house believed I did. Do you imagine I would trade that for a duke?" She had kissed him then to settle the matter. "I have had a duke, Nathaniel. I would not take another if they gilded him. I will have you, or no one at all." And so, on that soft green summer morning, she had him. She came up the aisle on the arm of the Dowager Duchess of Cranley, for there was no one in the world Charlotte would rather have given her away, and the old woman had declared that she did not care two straws that it was unconventional. She had searched half of England for this girl, and she would be the one to walk her to her happiness, or she would know the reason why. And the whole little church turned to watch her come, glowing in the summer light. And at the front of the church Dr. Merrick looked up and saw her, and his plain gray face was transformed by such a look of pure, disbelieving joy that half the congregation began to weep on the spot. They were married under the sunlit windows, among the wildflowers, and when it was done, and Nathaniel Merrick kissed his bride, the little church rang with such glad noise as its old stones had not heard in 100 years. There was dancing on the green afterward, and a long table set out under the trees, and Mrs. Fenwick, who had left the cold service of Wexcombe forever to keep house for her beloved mistress in her warm new home, and counted it the best bargain of her life, wept happily into every course. The Dowager Duchess of Cranley, who had not danced in 20 years, danced twice, and declared she might make a habit of it. And Charlotte moved through it all with her new husband's hand in hers, warm and alive and loved and free. And if she thought at all of the cold house and the cold man she had left behind a year before, it was only for a moment, and only with a distant, clear-eyed peace, the way one thinks of a bad winter long since past. As for the others, for every story must account for all its people, and see justice fully done. Lady Vesey, who had never been Lady Vesey at all, did not fare well. The full weight of the law had come down upon her, and the Dowager Duchess of Cranley had seen to it personally that it did not lift. The long grey trail of her poisonings, the merchant in Bristol, the widower in Bath, the lonely spinster, and God alone knew how many more, was laid bare at last, name by name and grave by grave, and there was no charm in the world, and no beauty either, that could talk its way out from under so black a mountain of proof. She was tried, and she was convicted, and she was sent away to a cold place very far from any drawing room or dinner table or lonely soul with a fortune, and she would trouble no gentle person ever again. She had promised the dowager that there would always be another house, always another fool. She had been wrong. There would be no more houses for her. There would only be a small gray cell, and a great deal of time, and the bitter company of her own empty heart, which was, perhaps, the truest justice of all, for a woman who had never in her life loved anything but money. And Julian, Duke of Wexcombe. Julian lost everything, exactly as he had foreseen. Without Charlotte's fortune, there was nothing left to hold back the tide of debt, and it came in at last and swallowed the whole of it. Wexcombe Hall, the great cold house, the mortgaged lands, the borrowed silver, the whole magnificent rotting shell of the Wexcombe name was sold piece by piece to satisfy his creditors. The paintings went, and the horses, and the fine dark coats, and finally the house itself, the ancient seat of his family for 300 years, passed into the hands of strangers. The last Duke of Wexcombe walked out of it with very little more than he had once so casually stepped over. He did not descend into utter ruin. The dowager, who was just, and who had loved his father once, quietly saw to it that he was not left to starve in a ditch, though she did it for the dead father's sake and not the living son's, and Julian never knew whose hand it was. He lived, in the end, a small and quiet and greatly reduced life, in a modest set of rooms in a modest town, on a modest income, under a great name that no longer meant anything at all. And he had, as Charlotte had told him he would, a very great deal of time to think. Whether he became a better man in that long, quiet, reduced life, the story does not truly say, for Charlotte never troubled to find out, exactly as she had promised, and so neither shall we. Perhaps he did. Perhaps stripped of everything that had let him be so cold and careless, the money, the name, the house, the endless cushion of privilege that had let him step over other human beings his whole life long. Perhaps he learned, too late for it to do him any good, something of what it was to be small and unwanted and overlooked. Perhaps in the long evenings of his diminished life, he thought of a girl on a cold floor and understood at last all the way down what he had thrown away. One rather hopes he did. It would be a pity to suffer so much and learn nothing. But he learned it alone, whatever he learned. That was the shape of his justice, not a cell, not a scaffold, but simply this: to be left entirely alone in the cold and the quiet, with no one to blame and no one to step over and no one in all the world who thought of him at all. He had made a house with no love in it, and in the end that was the house he was left to live in for the rest of his days. And Charlotte never thought of him. That in the final reckoning was the completest justice of all. Not hatred. Hatred would have been a kind of tie, a chain still binding her to him. She simply, wholly, happily forgot him. He had wanted a wife he need never think about once long ago. In the end he got his wish from the other side of it, a wife who never thought about him at all. For Charlotte was far too busy being happy. The years that followed were good ones, the best of her life, and they only grew better. The warm, bright house filled in time with children who ran laughing through halls that were always warm and were never, not for a single hour, cold or lonely or dark. Dr. Merrick went on with his good work, and Charlotte often went with him now, for she had a gift for comforting the sick that she had learned, she said, the hard way from the inside. The Dowager Duchess of Cranley, fierce and beloved, was grandmother to them all in everything but name, and spoiled the children outrageously, and lived through sheer force of will. Everyone agreed to a tremendous and triumphant old age, long enough to see the girl she had rescued grow gloriously, unmistakably, permanently happy. And on soft summer evenings, sometimes, Charlotte would sit in her own garden, with earth on her hands and her mother's flowers all around her and her husband's hand in hers and her children's voices drifting across the green, and she would turn her face up to the last of the sun and feel it warm upon her skin, and remember, just for a moment, just long enough to know the full sweet weight of what she had, that she had once lain dying and unwanted on a cold floor in a cold house, with no one in all the world to come for her. And then someone had knocked at the gate. And everything had changed. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.